purpose today is to inform you a little bit about how we grow things and where we grow things, and to really try to focus on some of the current problems that we have today in modern agriculture, and what we can do better. And then hopefully by the end of class, we'll move into some solutions to this. What are our options when it comes to changing the way that we grow food and produce livestock, and are those actually helpful or not to us? And like, why are they helpful? And why is perhaps local and organic farming not a complete solution, even though we might very much want it? Okay, all right, so our learning objectives today. Let's talk about current agricultural practices. We're going to look at the sustainability of modern agriculture. Hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about the contrast between artificial selection, the traditional way in which we have run agriculture and livestock husbandry, versus artificial selection, versus genetically modified organisms. The new way in which we're trying to reinvent agriculture so that it's more productive and more nutritious, and we have organisms or crops that grow for us in a wider variety of conditions and that allow us to use an appropriate amount of chemicals for their growth. Yeah, Taylor.
So are environmental scientists for or against GMOs in general?
So I think that most environmentalists are in the no GMO camp. Most environmental scientists realize the facts of our current agricultural situation, that we must genetically modify crops in order to keep up with changing climate and productivity that's necessary for a growing human population. And that this is the way that we can do it. This is the way that we can manage this. And that used in an appropriate fashion, they're extraordinarily beneficial. That's why we use them to begin with. That there's a time and a place for GMOs. And it's not in lots of other areas where we think we might like to use them.
Because I know no GMO on plants is a huge thing for
Oh, yeah.
consumers now.
Of course it is. And there are lots of important ethical, moral reasons why you might choose that. And that is a great choice. And there are lots of downsides to using GMOs that go along with lots of the problems of modern agriculture. But they're the way forward for lots of different populations of people on the planet. Yeah.
I think the GMOs, the difference is like what the motivation behind using the GMO is, because some of it's just for money or for patenting of certain things, but some of it affects the nutritional and digestive value of it, and that's detrimental. So I think it's kind of weighing the pros and cons.
Right, and so that's what I mean is like there's a time and a place for GMOs. Their widespread, unhindered use is not okay. There are real consequences that we're seeing in the environment from that even today with some products that are on the market. But we couldn't produce the insulin that we do, even though it's got ridiculously expensive, without GMOs. Yeah.
Last thing.
No.
So, on GMOs, they have to put what they're genetically modifying it with. Because
No,
I can
not in the United States. They do in many countries in Europe, as well as some places in Asia and South America. But the United States voted in 2014, I think, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution that GMO labeling is not required in the United States.
Because my cousin had to stop buying a certain vegetable from a certain place.
Yeah.
He's allergic to peanuts and some other stuff, and they genetically modified peanuts into that, so that set off its allergies to around peanuts and certain vegetables anymore.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Yes, that can happen. That is one of the consequences of this, moving genes around from one species to another. Maybe. Like there are, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, because there is a lot of interest in these issues, and there's lots of facts out there that you may or may not know, and there's all kinds of labeling that goes along with this in both kind of camps as well as on the actual products themselves. And we're of the generation that's having to decide what we want to do with this. Like science has produced GMOs for us, and so do we want to use them or not? Can I show you some of the consequences, both good and bad, to help you make a better decision for yourself? Okay, so at the basis of this, though, is why do we farm? What does farming do for us?
Food.
It gives us food.
It feeds the animals.
Food. for humans, is what I'm hearing, as well as livestock, which goes back to us usually.
Doesn't it also like cultivate farming's good for the actual ground and terrain, isn't it? Like the nutrients that go into the soil.
That one's worse.
Depending on what it is and in what quantity.
We definitely are modifying nutrient cycles of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium largely are what we find ourselves needing to amend soils for most frequently. The process of agriculture where we take plants and we utilize them and waste them essentially in places where they're not grown disrupts the normal cycle of life and death of that plant material in that own ecosystem. And so in lots of cases, we're doing something with the soil that's making it constantly productive and fertile. But we're disrupting lots of times the normal flow of nutrients in that ecosystem and the normal cycle of productivity for those places. And we're making them more productive than they would have been if we left it as a long-term prairie, which is most of our really highly intensive arable land is what used to be a grassland ecosystem. Okay.
Isn't there rotations that they're supposed to do?
Yes, and any farmer that I have actually talked to, and when I meet a farmer, I'm like, you must be it. Because I'm not of an agrarian background. I'm not a 4-H'er, so that was never my tract. Any good farmer is rotating crops. They're growing a diversity of crops, not only for the soil nutrition and nutrient cycle to prevent soil exhaustion, but also for their financial stability. They recognize that at any given time, the weather might be such that they lose a particular crop. And they must have something else that they can sell. Okay, that's their livelihood. And so most farmers are involved in some type of polyculture, where they may still have a mega farm that's growing wheat, but they have other areas of that large landscape that is growing another type of crop. And they'll rotate what's actually growing on a plot of land year by year by year, including a rest year or two, a fallow period. Yeah.
When I lived in Lynchburg, there was a guy around us. My dad was talking to him. But
Yeah.
he owned I want to say 17 different plots of land in Lynchburg. And on each one of them he grew corn or soybeans, but he rotated
Yeah.
off under the right side of the road, soybeans and the left side
Yes.
was corn.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
he did it every 2 years.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be complicated, but man, if you don't do it, you'll find that your corn crop peters out. You have to switch because plants take different nutrients and they return different nutrients to the soil. And if you grow the same thing year after year after year, you will end up spending more money in fertilizers to get the same productivity off the land. And so farmers have realized this. They are 100% bought into this process of our new system of agriculture, which actually is the same as our old system, which is a little bit interesting to think about as well. Yeah, Elena.
Wasn't cycling crops kind of a result of the Dust Bowl? Wasn't that
Yes, it was. So in traditional agricultural systems, we did rotate crops, both based upon seed availability and land fertility and weather conditions that were changing. We grew a variety of crops because we needed a variety of crops, and that's what we were self-sufficient on. During the early part of modern agriculture, in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, we got into this idea of let's plant the same thing over and over again, and that gave us stability in terms of economic income and in market prices, which helped food become less expensive for everybody. The consequence was that we didn't understand fully, because of our current state of science, essentially, was that we were going to cause soil exhaustion. And so we did have a Dust Bowl decade almost here in the United States, where the Midwestern United States, Oklahoma, Panhandle, Texas, Arkansas, Nebraska, a little bit of Missouri, a bit of the Dakotas, had really, really dry weather. And so they had this weather event that precipitated this. And it meant that they couldn't grow crops without the crops holding the soil in place. When the wind blew, it all literally blew away. And it blew away to the extent that it caused these huge dust storms that smothered people and animals and crops and livestock and forced a huge migration of the farmers in that region west. And that's what started off the agricultural productivity of the California and Oregon valleys, because the farmers moved there and they started farming, which is what they knew how to do. Yeah.
Is there any laws that would like require them to take schedule? Or is it
No.
just kind of like whatever the person
This is best practices. And again, if you as a farmer want to be economically productive, which is, you know, what you're doing, like most farmers are in it because they want to feed people and they like being on the land. This is a job that gives them lots of flexibility in terms of work schedule, and, you know, they like to be alone and not interact with people lots of times. But if they want to make money doing it, then they're doing crop rotation, they're doing contour tilling, they're putting down winter cover on the land so that their soil stays in place. They're trying to manage the amount of fertilizers that they produce. They're trying to do it in a fashion that is sustainable for them because that's their livelihood, that's how they're making money. Why else do we farm though, besides for food production and to make money if you're a farmer? I mean, some people that are getting into farming are interested in this as experiments and, you know, how can we produce food in a sustainable fashion? Like they have almost a research aspect to farming today. What else does farming give us though besides food?
Well, farming doesn't only just give us food, you do farm things like cotton or
Good. Good. So we also get things like fibers out of farming. Okay? Our textile industry started in farming. Okay? That's where we get cotton from. We grow and raise things like cows and sheep and this dumb game my husband's playing right now, he grows alpacas. Right? In order to get wool. Okay, we grow crops to feed livestock to get fibers to make textiles and clothing out of it. Now we've done a lot with synthetic fibers, again, in the modern era of textiles and fabrics, but still at the basis of that is cotton and leather and wool items from a whole range of different organisms. Okay, like we wear rabbit fur now, silk. Okay, that's from an animal that has to be farmed. What else? Definitely get money out of it. Like, and again, it's not, we can't grow money on trees, but for some crops, it's darn close.
pharmaceuticals.
Good, pharmaceuticals. What are you thinking, Cassidy?
People just enjoy it.
Yeah, it is fun. I enjoy my garden as much as like it drives me crazy. I do enjoy my garden.
It's pharmaceuticals and the whole, what do they grow? Tobacco and.
Yeah, so we can, again, you can think of this as
recreation.
income,
Yeah.
recreation. We often term these things cash crops, right? They don't have a nutritional value, but you can sell them for a lot of money because people still like to eat them. So things like coffee, definitely we have a very kind of burgeoning marijuana hemp market that is on the recreational side of this. Has a little flavor of textiles and pharmaceuticals potentially to it, but is very much in recreation. And it's replacing, in some cases, a lot of what used to be tobacco. And again, our region, our neighboring regions are founded on tobacco farming. Yes.
Energy, isn't there something with corn and like working fuel
Sure,
and
you
corn?
can do biofuels. It's not a ton of what we do here in the United States because our climate is based for corn, and corn is a very inefficient biofuel source. But things like sawgrass and sugarcane are very efficient sources of actually turning organic matter into fuel. And so other nations where they have the right climate for those types of crops are heavily engaged in biofuel production as part of their agriculture. All right, yeah.
But like, it kind of goes in hand with money, but just like the economy in general, like creating jobs for people.
Good. And so again, we can think of this as you can be a job in terms of a farmer, but there are all kinds of jobs that agriculture feeds into. Okay, all of our food production, all of our food service industries, all of our grocery industries, all of our meat packaging and processing and preparation falls into this. If you're in the textile industry or the clothing industry, again, you're basing part of this out of agriculture. It's a feeder industry for that. Here in the United States, it's somewhere between like 17 and 21% of our gross domestic product can be attributed to agriculture, either directly or in one of those kind of secondary industries. Well,
Farming of like erosion and productive.
yes. And so again, best practices with farming are designed in order to preserve your soil. Like that is your resource, is the soil. And so farmers and livestock managers that are engaged with these practices, that want to do this for the long run, they're using vegetation, whether it's an actual crop or a cash crop or replanting native vegetation, as a way to revitalize their ecosystem. So you can think of it as rehabilitation. And we have big programs in the United States actually that are aimed at giving farmers subsidies to not farm certain portions of their land. Places where it's a prairie pothole, it's an ephemeral wetland, or it's a riparian zone, it's right along a stream or a lake or a river, or it's a place on their land that's known to be habitat for an endangered or threatened species. We pay them to leave it and to not farm it, to leave it as natural habitat. But we pay them like a price similar to what they would get if they farmed that land and went to a market with the product. So we want to replace their income that they're losing by leaving it native habitat. And that's been huge for rebuilding migrating bird populations in the United States. Okay, the last thing that I would mention is timber. Which a bit it goes along with fibers. Okay, a lot of our construction materials come out of agriculture. And again, when we think about agricultural systems, we can get into all kinds of ecosystem management in terms of we're managing an ecosystem to be agriculturally productive. In some cases, we're managing a pseudo-natural ecosystem in order to give us something like pharmaceuticals or timber or textile fibers or nutrient cycles and habitat rehabilitation out of it. So modern agriculture and how we do this starts to spread its roots into all different areas of environmental science, of ecosystem management. It's beyond just the traditional farm that we tend to do. Yeah.
So just quickly talking about what I thought about this, as an environmental person, is it better to cut down wood to use as supplies, or is it better to use the trees and use composite wood instead?
Oh man, I think that I don't know that I have a definitive answer for that. There are benefits to selective cutting practices in forests. Forests are supposed to go through a cycle of trees dying and renewal and clearing in forests, and that the transition phase is actually the most biodiverse phase of any ecosystem. And so our forestry management practices for the last 50 to 75 years here in the United States have been to preserve the forest as is. And that's not the way a forest actually works. Okay, a forest turns over and a forest has localized disturbances, and we've done everything we can to not let that happen. And so selective cutting is a way to go in and take certain trees for use, for money, to turn a profit on that land that is not being used for agriculture or urban development, and to keep it native habitat, and to restore some of that normal cycle that happens in the forest ecosystem. So I think there's an advantage to using real wood. I think, though, that when it comes to waste management practices and land use practices, we need to be reusing. We'll talk about this next week. We've gone way into recycling, which is great. Okay, like hands down, recycling, is a total thing now. When I was a kid, it wasn't. Okay, like I was like, guys, to my parents, like, we gotta recycle, and they were like, what? And I was like, man, you can recycle all this stuff. It'll be great. We'll make money and we'll save the planet. And they were like, oh, I have a crazy 7-year-old. Okay, and so, but they did it, and now we all recycle. We all are, even if we don't do it, we're aware of this. We have forgotten the other R's that go along with recycling. Okay, that's a problem. That's where our problem is today. So, using recycled wood, I think whether it's a composite product or it's a refurbished product, is where we need to start focusing our efforts. Is there a way that we can, yes, we're always going to need a supply of new things, but we have a ton of this material already here ready to go that doesn't need to be in the landfill, does not need to become solid waste pollution here or in aquatic ecosystems. So can we do that better? And the reason that modern agriculture and urban development and solid waste production is important is because we're trying to avoid this. Okay, this is the slide that we ended up with at the end of class last Thursday. We, by and large, don't live like this, okay? But millions of people around the world do, and so why is that? Why is there this discrepancy? Why is there an overabundance of food in the United States and there is food lacking in other countries? But that's point of modern agriculture is to feed people and provide them with the things that they need, how come we continue to fail at it? Okay, even though we're so productive when it comes to agriculture, how come there are still people that lack this basic resource? Okay, so agriculture is all about feeding people. We have 7.5 billion people on the planet now or so, and we are headed very directly towards at least 9.5 to 10 billion people in our lifetimes. Okay, we're going to add another 2 to 2.5 billion people to the planet. And we need to feed and clothe and provide housing for all of them. And again, that comes out of agriculture at its base. And so how are we going to do that? Okay. What is good about our current system of agriculture and what needs to be improved with this kind of outlook in mind, that we need to transform our waste stream and we still need to be providing the same resources for people, and we need to be providing even more resources. So again, we get clothing, we get nutrition, we get materials for a wide range of industries out of this when it comes to agriculture. And what is the sustainability of our current practices? How does it work for the environment? How is it bad for the environment? How is it good and bad for the economy as well as social practices? And we've started to touch on lots of these issues already, which is great.
Isn't most of the growth that's expected to happen outside of the U.S.?
It is. And if you actually look at the U.S.'s population numbers and the demographics, our population as citizens, current residents of the United States, has been stable for at least a decade now. And the only reason the U.S.'s population continues to grow is because of immigration. And so that's something that we have to face, is what is our population doing in the future? And so the places where population is growing fastest are in Southeast Asia and in Africa, and to a much lesser extent in South America.
Wasn't here a huge
Yes, definitely population traditionally in our lifetime and generation has grown fastest in China, but they have stabilized their population through their very rigorous family planning policies. And so India is one of these Southeast Asian countries that falls into this category. They too are facing a population crisis, and they've met it in a very different fashion, less effectively than China. Okay, all right. So what we're doing is we're trying to fight world hunger, right? We're trying to provide everybody with the resources that they need, and we've actually done a good job of this. The percentage of people that are living with hunger has been declining, both the percentage as well as the actual number of people that are experiencing hunger. This is one of the UN's big goals, is always to reduce the number of people that live with hunger and a lack of adequate nutrition, both calories-wise as well as micronutrition, getting the right mix of nutrition in their diet. Yeah.
So since the population is going to, world population is going to continue to rise, do you think that number hunger is going to continue to rise or level out?
I think it depends on what we do with agriculture. It depends on how we distribute resources around the world. Right? Yeah.
Going down or would it level out?
I would say if we kept as it is now, we would see a rise in poverty and people that live with hunger as a result of that. The places where world hunger continues have shifted. From the early 1990s, when we went on the World Hunger Campaign, you may not remember they still have them, but they're not as prevalent. They have these commercials of these hungry, malnourished kids in Southeast Asia and Africa, and they said, give us money, we will feed these kids, and so we did. And it helped, okay? Those advertisements, those funding agencies have continued, but they're less public now. And as a result, maybe our ability to fight world hunger has changed because the people that need to be in those commercials have changed. The people who face hunger today are a different group of humans on the planet than they were in the past. And that's maybe more difficult for us to want to help them. I'm not sure why we're less interested in fighting world hunger than we were. That might be an interesting thing to explore. Traditionally, we saw things in kind of, this is Southern Asia here, this is Sub-Saharan Africa, this is Eastern Asia. We went from having essentially 1 billion people that were living with hunger to something like 795 million people, and you're like, that's still a lot of people. And yes, it is. Okay, 800 million people still do not get the calories and nutrition that they need on a daily basis. But that's 250 million people less than did before, even though we have increased the world population by 1 billion people. And so we are doing something right. And we have gotten better at distributing food, perhaps helping people to grow food and be self-sufficient in the places that they are. But world hunger remains a real problem. Okay? There are still 800 million people that don't have access to the food that they have. Whereas at my house, I have food that we won't use, and that I will compost as a result.
Is there a clear solution to this?
Some of it is supply and distribution and getting the food where it is grown to the people who actually need it. And that can be complicated first by war. So if you have a war-torn region, like Yemen and Syria today, places in Africa where there's open warfare, one, like the normal distribution supply chain is totally broken down. And two, it's hard for aid groups to go in and safely provide aid to the people who actually need it. So that can become very complicating. We're humans, as like every birthday, I blow the candles and I'm like, world peace this year. Okay, like we're getting it. We're humans and there's gonna be war. And so there'll always be a population that is living in that type of famine, poverty condition. Some of it is overpopulation of people, and that you've had a population growth in a region and we've yet to extend supply lines to that region. We've yet to make that population self-sufficient. So there's kind of two things. There's like an economic thing, and then there's a kind of a political war thing, I think that happens.
Because I think one of the hardest parts of this is you have to it almost has to be groups now, instead of, because the US government is so
Yes, our current policy is to scale back international aid as a government, or as a governmental organization, and that has real consequences for these types of aid fronts. It's not just about providing medicines and economic resources to people. There's a very basic level of food and education that the U.S. government also provides.
So like all these nations, like their leaders, are they worried about all the people we're targeting, or like they more worried about other things?
Well, you know, the scapegoat answer is you'd have to ask them, Willow. Yes and no. Some presidents, some prime ministers are very interested in giving aid for their countries, are working on this in a very real, tangible fashion. In other nations, the elected representatives of their country are based on a system of corruption, and they are actually getting aid that is, you know, given to their government, and they're only distributing it to people of their same political party or their same ethnic group, and they are leaving others out. Again, as a, you know, thinking about it as a citizen, there's finally enough information for you to start to choose which aid groups and which countries you can send aid to, and be assured that you're going to be actually helping people. And maybe that's a policy of the United States now, and that they're trying to reassess what governments they should be interacting with that are actually going to be most beneficial. Who are they just propping up a leader that's being corrupt? But they certainly haven't put that type of face on their aid approval.
What happened to taking over countries? Why?
So it seems like a good idea, right? They're like, we'll just go in and put in our person. And then we'll put in a person who has the same ideas and morals in us, and like it will go swimmingly. Guess what? It's difficult to get a culture to accept a person that is literally a figurehead. You must get a leader from your country that represents the people of your country. Okay? Or they'll not be accepted. They will be ineffective. They can get as much international aid as they want, and no one will actually take it from them because they don't trust that leader.
The super famous dude that went to jail, he's dead.
Oh, the guy in South Africa?
Yeah.
Oh man, Nelson Mandela.
Nelson
Mandela.
Yes. And think about Gandhi. Think about Nelson Mandela. Think about Abraham Lincoln. You know, these are unique individuals in human history. Okay? There's 200 something nations on Earth. They are not all going to have a unique individual as their leader. And so how do we as a global community deal with that? How do we overcome that? Okay, here in the United States, we have hunger, okay, we have homelessness, we have poverty. Don't forget this happens here. I asked you about global poverty numbers on your homework, or homework 2. I asked you about poverty numbers for Cincinnati as well, to try to get you thinking about what's happening in our local neighborhood. Here in the United States, we tend to think about this not necessarily as hunger or malnutrition, but we think about it as food insecurity. The lack of knowing where your next meal is going to come from. Step outside. This is a real problem for 20 to 25% of U.S. citizens. There are real consequences for people who can't get enough food. Okay? You get sick, which means you can't go to work, which means it's harder for you to get food for you and your family. For most adults, this means that they skip meals in favor of other people in their family being able to eat. It means that they have to visit food pantries and rely upon social welfare systems to a greater extent. It means that for kids, they are taking low-income school lunches and breakfasts. Please remember that school programs don't run over the summer, that they don't run over the weekend, that people who are on Social Security today lots of times don't get enough Social Security income to be able to buy basic food requirements. This is food insecurity, where when your welfare check comes, when you actually get paid on payday, you have food for a small period of time, and then it runs out again. It affects more people than you think. Yeah.
Food insecurity is kind of like a hot button word right now, and so I myself personally have had conflicted feelings over the kind of presentation it gets in the media, and
Sure.
I'm kind of a problematic person. I'm like, really, and I feel the same way as a mother, like as you do about it, but at the same time, I think culturally it's hard to wrap your brain around. Like, really, like, is that just an American, like, does food insecurity mean that, like, you just don't have what you want to eat for dinner? And kind of like a flippant response to it, because we are a nation of such abundance
Right.
that, I think sometimes it doesn't get the attention, because it's easy to say, what's food insecurity? Oh, so you're just eating this, but you don't like it, or
Right.
you don't.
No.
But it's legitimately like, I have no idea if I'm going to eat dinner or not.
Right, yes. And surprisingly, it happens in college students a lot, because your schedule is such that you may be in class during lunchtime, you may be in class during dinner time, you may need to go straight from school to work, and so you miss a meal. Yeah, exactly. Like, all of a sudden, if you really look at how many meals you ate as a college student over the last week, it might not be, what is it supposed to be, at least 21, right? 3 times 7?
I may have had 4.
Right, okay, and that's the high end of food insecurity. Like,
Mhm.
yes, there's probably food available to me, but actually I'm not taking in that nutrition. Actually, I'm not getting it. The low end of that is where you have no economic resources in order to buy food. Okay? The result is the same as world hunger and famine. You have people that are malnourished, you have people that are more likely to be sick, you have people that have a harder time earning an income. The lack of good nutrition affects your growth as a person, like as your physical being. It also affects your mental well-being in lots of different ways that are both biochemical as well as sociological. Yeah.
I have to say, a lot of these people, I've done a lot of outreach
Yeah.
for like this kind of stuff. These people are so stubborn. My church, we have a food bank that we do, and we started out where all the food was free, no one would come.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't take free food.
Right.
So we had to make it cost something, very little, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't take it if it was free.
Or you
Pride
have to
issue.
say that if you want to partake of our food bank, you need to do 2 volunteer hours this week at the food bank. Most people recognize that they don't want a handout, they want to earn this. And they want to show that they are a fully functioning person in society, that is capable of working, that they are worthy of your generosity. Definitely we saw that during this latest government shutdown where we had government workers that were needing to go to food banks because they had missed paychecks. And they, they had run out of savings and they were like, I'm happy to be here, I'm happy to take your food, but I am signing up to volunteer, to help sort items, to collect items. I will be back to help you after the government shutdown because I'm so appreciative of this and because I want to earn this when I'm getting. Yeah.
Williams Brickwork at a high school, they have a program where like, for like high school students, if like you can't afford like X amount, your parents can't.
Yeah.
If you wanna work in the cafeteria or like help do chairs, they'll give you,
Yeah.
6 meals for the weekend.
Wow, that's nice.
And then, also like during like the summer, they have
Yep.
like work programs for
Right.
the kids that live in town and they can.
So what we've done about summertime for lots of kids is that as soon as we recognize this, which again has been kind of recently, we do all kinds of things, usually through libraries and community centers and churches, in order to say, hey, we're having STEM day today at the library. Come do experiments with us, and you get a free lunch. Okay? And then when you actually go to those things, like we go, because I'm like, we got to do STEM things with the kids, right? They're like, here's a dinner. Oh, your parent came with you. They can have a meal too. Okay, these are ways to get food out into the community and places that would need it, and to do it in a healthy fashion, right? So we've talked about hunger and famine. There's another end to this nutrition scale, which is obesity, when we overeat. Okay, when we have an overindulgence, largely in calories. Yeah.
My best friend and her family, her mother's more or less been declared as not able to work.
Yeah.
Which I find kind of dumb because she functions fine, but it's a mental thing. But she abuses the welfare system to the point where my best friend can't get a job until she has to move out. And if she moves out, then their family gets relocated to a different government hotel.
So there are excesses to the system, and I wish I could make the system perfect so that those people would get weeded out. But in any of these systems, I want you to think that, and I want you to understand that those riders on the system, those abusers of the system, are a small fraction of the actual recipients of the aid. Just like we talk about giving aid to corrupt governments, yes, we are giving aid to a corrupt government, but some citizens are benefiting from that aid. We are helping someone. And I think that it's easy for us to focus on the corrupt governments. It's easy for us to focus on the welfare queens and say, look at the abuses of the system. This is not working. Yes, there are ways that we can improve the system. That doesn't mean that we have to get rid of the system. So there's a line, there's a gradation there.
I will say that, for example, we have a food pantry
Yes,
here, and I don't know if you guys are aware of it. It's a really cool program.
it's nice.
It's free to anybody who needs it, and it's food, it's literally, you open up a huge closet, it's a room, it's got all sorts of food, toiletries,
Yes, I was like-
basic needs. And the thing that's great about it is that it's student staff supported. So when you have a little extra, drop something off at the food pantry, because it's no questions asked. You don't have to apply. You don't have to go through any questions. Go to student services and just say, I need something. And I think taking the shame away from it
Oh, yeah.
is who cares? But things like that are effective
Oh, yeah.
when, give when you can, take when you need, and, don't be embarrassed by it. It's life.
Yeah, I'm always sharing,
Mhm.
right? Okay,
But
one of my
that's it.
kids
It's
is
here. Use it. If you need it, please use it. It's there.
yes. The more people that use it, the more it's likely to be funded and to continue. Okay.
There's good stuff in there too. I think.
Oh, yeah, and they have.
It's just down the hall. If you go through, right at Peter Jones as you come in, that door entry, right there's the Bible diggers. So Jen Ratton, Student
She runs
Services,
it.
she runs it. And you can go, but at that,
just drop stuff off there.
you can just drop stuff off, you can get stuff.
Right,
Whenever
yeah.
you need it. It's not you don't have to go through any hoops.
No.
Just, yeah.
If you're
Do you have
like,
any
man.
deodorant in there? I need deodorant, seriously. anything.
Honestly, if
Yeah.
you're like, oh man, my baby sister needs diapers,
Yep.
go get some diapers, take them home.
Mhm.
Or
It's there.
don't
People
have
have
to go
given
to
it
the
to be taken, so.
Yes. Bless you. And don't write your name down, right?
Mm-mm.
All right. Another factor in this that layers on top of the basic lack of nutrition or overnutrition is the human-land disconnectivity that goes along with living in urban environments and living in urban communities. And this is the understanding that the resources that are consumed consumed in an urban environment, remember 75% of our resources are used in urban communities, all those resources don't come from the actual land on which the city sits. All of the food, all of the mineral resources, they come from other communities and it's transported in. And this results in a disconnect between people that live in urban environments and where their food comes from. Okay, they don't know how to grow a head of lettuce. I tried to grow broccoli last year in my garden and I was like, didn't know broccoli grew like that. But I've eaten broccoli for, 37 something years. So, even for us that are woke, you could say to some extent, I certainly don't consider myself that, there's lots of misunderstandings about where our food comes from, how it's processed, how it's grown, what it takes to produce that food, and get it to our tables. Okay, you may be familiar with preparing food, with cooking food, but growing food and getting the resources, the water, the fertilizer, the feed for that livestock, how to butcher that livestock, how to harvest the food and get it ready for our market. Lots of times that's outside our realm of experience when we live in urban centers. So this, again, modern agriculture and the business of feeding us, either well or poorly, also harkens back to this movement of people from being largely an agrarian society where you were farming to an urban society where we're developing other types of industries and businesses. Okay. So the footprint of the city can be small in actual area, but it can be very large when we look at the amount of resources it takes to supply and keep the city running. The system of people living in an urban environment and bringing in goods and resources from the surrounding countryside or even from other nations can be really beneficial both to the consumers, like you can spend your time doing other things than growing food, which is good. And it's beneficial to the producers and farmers of food. They know they have a market. They know they can grow an excess of food, and it's not like they're going to have an excess of food for themselves. They can sell that to make money, okay, to better their own lives and selves as a result. But it's gotten inefficient, and it has gotten poor, as we've talked about in this distribution management, that the food that we're producing is not always going to the people that need it the most for a variety of reasons. Okay? And as populations increase in urban centers, the disconnect between food production and food resources becomes especially apparent in terms of land use and agriculture. Okay? If I had to come from a slightly agrarian suburban place in Arkansas, I would have no idea about farming. Okay? If I didn't know people who came from farming families, if I didn't know, the rice queen of whatever county in Arkansas, I wouldn't know that this was like a thing. Okay? I would just be like, oh, I go to the market and I buy rice. Okay. So where do we grow food? We have all kinds of different agricultural productivity areas. We have croplands where, again, we're growing plants. We have rangelands where we raise livestock, animals. We can also include in this fisheries, places where we grow or catch wild-caught fish for our, again, protein purposes largely. Pretty much, if it's an arable piece of land on Earth, has the right climate in terms of temperature and water, precipitation, we are growing food there, whether it's a plant or an animal. If it is arable land in the globe, we have put it into agriculture. That has been great in terms of providing nutrition for our growing population. Our ability to constantly transform what was the edge of arable land into now fully arable land is part of what has allowed us to have a big human population on the planet. We can turn more land into agriculture, but we're at the limit of that now, okay? We can't grow food in Antarctica, okay? We can't grow food in northern Russia or northern Canada. We can't grow food in the Saharan Desert without really intensive economic and environmental consequences that, we're not there yet, and we probably can't ever do it in a long-term fashion, okay? So there are some places that are always going to be off limits when it comes to agriculture, and we are not going to be able to move into those ecosystems. There are some places in the world that are better at food production than others, and that's what we can see in this particular map of the globe. The more red the area, the greater the percentage of the land of that nation is in agriculture. And so we see that kind of in the temperate zones, both north and south, are places where we see very intense agriculture. Those are the places that have the right climate, that have the right soil to start with in order to grow lots of food.
Does Canada not grow anything?
So
I'm just looking at going, I mean, clearly you can because
you can.
Alaska does.
Yes. What I would say is that in Canada, they don't have enough people to grow a lot of food. Like if you go into Manitoba, if you go into the provinces that are just north of the breadbasket, the agrarian states here in the United States, into Ottawa and Manitoba, a little bit Saskatchewan, and I might be off on the border there. It is fields. It is grain fields, largely. They are growing food, but it only goes up so far because then they run out of population to grow food. Okay, they just don't have enough people to do so. A lot of that land is still federal government land for them, and no one owns it. No one is actively farming it.
Canada.
I don't know. I liked it when I was there. What's very interesting is that with climate change, this is going to push in our region northward. What is now the breadbasket of the world in the United States is going to become too hot and dry, and those provinces in central Canada are going to become the breadbasket of the world. Like, we need to be thinking about starting to grow crops and how we're going to manage land in Canada, because that's going to be the big agricultural base of North America. The same thing in Russia. These Russian steppe countries where we have prairie grasslands in Central Asia, that have been intensely agricultural for a long time, many, many centuries of human history, that's going to move northward again into what is Russia and China today. And they're going to experience an agricultural boom in productivity. And how are we going to distribute their surpluses around the world? Yeah. It's going to change it. And that's another factor to think about, is how are we going to adapt to this type of change in economic income? You know, in the United States, we might have lower agricultural productivity. What are we going to replace that GDP with? Well, how Canada's like, yeah, all right, like, how are we going to make a better, trade agreement with Canada to where we get food at the same price that we have grown today when they're actually growing it?
When is it expected to happen?
Now. It's now. Definitely in places in Russia, how do they transform land that is currently not in agriculture into agricultural productivity as climate changes? How can they plan for that and adapt for that? Are they even thinking about it? Okay. All right. The kind of long-term technique and how we have transformed plants and animals around us into agricultural crops is the process of artificial selection. And artificial selection is our traditional technique for taking a wild, edible object, plant or animal, and making it more productive, of enhancing the traits about us that are most beneficial to us, whether it's nutrition, or calories-wise, or fiber, textile, lumber production. Okay? So it's an old technique of taming objects. Again, this dumb game my husband's playing, he has to tame wild animals, right, in order to help them do stuff, because they're dumb. And he's a bad animal trainer. Because they'll pack us just run away.
They just spit.
All right. What we do in artificial selection is we work within the confines of normal life cycles of organisms. We select organisms that have the traits that we want. They have lots of fruit. They are the tastiest. That animals produce the most meat or the most wool products. And we select those organisms to breed and pass their traits on to the next generation. And thus the next generation is more likely to have the traits that we desire to a greater extent or to have them at all. Those individuals in the population that don't have the traits that we want, they taste bitter, they grow slow, they're not aesthetically pleasing, we say, it was nice knowing you, you can live your life, that's great, but we're not going to let you have any offspring. And in doing so, they evolve the population towards a suite of traits that are most beneficial to humans. We are artificially selecting those organisms to breed, not based upon their interactions with the environment around them, but what's most beneficial for humans. Okay. It's the basis of agriculture and animal husbandry. We've been doing it for a long time. Those organisms which live best and are most productive for humans are the ones that get selected to be planted or bred again into the future. In this process, we're limited to the natural variation of traits that's in a species. Okay, we will never get blue dogs because the blue coat color, like true, like neon blue, right, isn't a possibility in the genetics of dogs. Okay, you can dye your dog neon blue, but it will never happen naturally that you will breed 2 dogs of any species and get a neon blue dog. Okay. Yes, there are blue heelers. There are all kinds of, blues in the names of things, but it's like that nice gray steel cobalt. It's not like neon or. It would be cool. And we all want it.
That would be weird.
Yeah, maybe. But you can sell it for a lot of money. Right? Okay.
Sell it to the circus.
Yeah, there are perfect cauliflowers. Okay. What we're looking at here is corn. This is artificial selection in corn and maize that was done here in the Americas. What you see on here is wild type corn that you can still find growing in places in Mexico and Central America. We've artificially selected it over generational timescales to give us these huge corn cobs with lots of kernels, a whole variety of colors and sweetness levels that are perfect for the human palate. Okay, this would not have happened in natural selection. Okay, this is a plant that's readily going to be fed upon and preyed upon by other organisms. Any plant like this existing out in the environment is going to get eaten before it has a chance to reproduce. It just so happens that we eat it now rather than other types of organisms because we eat it and name it and then group of organisms gets around. Artificial selection has given us all the variety of breeds of dogs that we have. Dogs are all the same species, but we've artificially selected for different traits and different breeds of dogs. Okay? I'm not sure what breed my dog is. He's a bit of a mix, but he's a dog, okay? He looks really different than the Great Dane or the Chihuahua. The Chihuahua and the Great Dane here can breed and produce fertile offspring. They're the same species, like they need help to do it.
I have no idea what those look like.
Yeah, I don't know what this animal
Tread
will look
lightly.
like afterwards. But that's a great example of artificial
Long legs,
selection.
little body ears.
Sorry, I'm a visual person.
Long. I'm just imagining long
Probably
legs with a
not.
little body.
So, a Great Dane and Chihuahua are like the extremes of the scenario, right? The right mix would be fine.
The Great Dane's the male.
Yeah, you'd have a better chance if the Great Dane was the mom and the Chihuahua was the sire, definitely. The Chihuahua Dane is gonna have a hard time carrying Great Dane puppies.
Well, not only that.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is like.
The technical process has its risks, is what you're trying to say.
Yes, so this is another thing that I want you to understand about artificial selection. We have so artificialized the process of breeding that these organisms sometimes can't reproduce on their own without our help. Okay, that's true of lots of our agricultural crops today. Like, we have to go in and hand pollinate these suckers because we've so distorted their reproductive organs that they can't do it, and there's no insect out there anymore that will do it for us. Okay, like the dogs are an extreme example, but if we wanted to, we could. Okay. And think about this in animal husbandry. We take the sperm and semen from that perfect steer and we freeze it in long-term storage, and we'll use it for generations of cows afterwards, even though that steer is dead and gone for 20 years.
He lives on.
He lives on, okay, because he has those perfect traits. That's a cute. Is that a Chihuahua?
Yeah.
All right. That's cute. All right. The same thing can happen. This is wild mustard plant, and we've through artificial selection selected for different mutants in this organism that give us things like cauliflower and broccoli.
Those derived from wild mustard.
Yes, all of those.
So like they didn't exist.
They did exist as a mutant, as a gene
Okay.
variant of that organism, but we have taken that, we've turned that mutant into its own species because we have grown it for the trait that we desire. It would have died out or had a very limited distribution as a mutant, but as a crop product, we've enhanced that variability. We've kept that mutant alive in the population.
All these crops that were created by humans, are they considered different than something that was at this point are all of our crops some type of mutation?
All of our crops are some type of variation on a species like corn. The ability to cross-fertilize and interbreed sometimes is still there, and so we would consider them the same species. But are, broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage, the Brussels sprouts, the same species to us? No, we recognize them as very unique individual types of organisms. But they are all derivatives of the same ancestor. They all share a base genome.
So can
Yes.
broccoli reproduce, or do we have to artificially do that every time?
I'd have to check I can't remember if it's broccoli or cauliflower. In one of them, it's a flower mutation, and what you're actually eating are the flower buds of the organism. And in that case, those buds are sterile. And so you have to go about reproduction and breeding and getting more seeds in a different fashion than the crop you actually put.
It's so funny, those are like some of the things that are like super good for you too.
Oh yes, definitely. Like there's a reason why we've latched on to these mutants and grown them as species and as crops. All right. Okay. So when it comes to modern agriculture, one thing that I do want you to also recognize is that there are just 14 species of agricultural crops that provide for 90% of the world's calories. And much of the world is dependent upon one of just 5 basic carbohydrate sources. And so corn, wheat, and rice are some of the United States' top agricultural products, and they fall into that top 5 kind of calorie producing crop globally. Globally, we also see that sorghum and cassava are important calorie resources for a variety of different people. Cassava is like a potato, but it is not a potato, nor is it a sweet potato. It tastes good.
What is a sorghum?
Sorghum is a type of grain, so it's very like wheat.
Is this like gluten-free wheat? We have gluten-free wheat going on over here?
No, so when we get gluten-free products, it's about how we prepare and cook the wheat in order to not release the glutens that are normally in it to the things. So sorghum is on, again, that spectrum, but it's a grain product. All right, here in the United States, we have about 2.1 million farms. 46% of all of the land area in the United States is in agriculture, whether that's plants or animals. And again, our top kind of agricultural products are listed here. Definitely corn and soybeans, wheat and cotton and rice are what we're very familiar with. I want you to also recognize that cattle, both for beef as well as dairy products, is always in the top 5 agricultural products of an agrarian-based state. Okay. We tend to focus on the plants, but cattle is always up there. Okay. Again, the intensity of the green color here across the United States is showing you what percentage of that county actually is involved in agriculture. And so here in the United States, do we see a centralization or an intensification of agriculture? The Midwest, good. And again, the upper Midwest, like this region here.
The corn belt.
It is the Corn Belt. Now, if you know, like, you go to Iowa, give it about 2 months. You go to Iowa, it's going to be cornfields. Okay, they're growing corn. Minnesota too, and Wisconsin do a ton of corn. You go down into Arkansas and Missouri, you're going to hit soybeans and rice. They have a slightly different climate. They have a slightly different soil type. They have a different relationship to their freshwater resources that lets them grow those more water-intensive crops.
Florida would be more fossil crops than it does.
Yeah, they have a lot of orchards, but they've had actually a lot of problems with their orange orchards, which used to cover the central part of the state. The other thing that Florida suffers from is that they're getting into the production of tropical plants because that's their climate, but they have very poor soil. They're on top of limestone, and that's not a nutritious soil product. It does not produce soil. Like if you've been in Florida and you like I go out in my in-laws' yard and they're growing grass, I don't know how, and it's safe. Okay, like we don't grow our types of crops in sand. Okay, none of these crops are sand crops, and so they don't have the right setup to be very agriculturally productive.
I don't know, it's just every time I see like oranges or anything,
Mhm.
I always just assume they're from Florida.
Even in my lifetime, actually most of our oranges in the United States today come from California, because in Florida they've had extreme changes in their weather that have really both dried out and then early frost hit, or I say like kind of like late frost hit their oranges. And so what used to be huge orange fields around my in-laws and where my grandparents lived in Central Florida is now urban development or ranch land. It's no longer in orange production. Okay, definitely there. Also notice that in some places on the eastern seaboard, you get a little bit of light green that's come in. Definitely here in the valley region of California, this is again where most of our vegetable production comes from. It's grain production here in the plains veggie production along the coastline. Do you want me to start on Wyoming?
It's a cattle land. You're
Yeah.
eating all the products.
So
It's the
a
moon
lot of
land.
what's happening in Wyoming is ranch land is federal land. And so usually when it comes to federal land, we don't lease for plant production, but we will lease for timber or rangeland production. And so that's what happens there. A lot of the land in Wyoming too is not arable. Like you can't grow crops in the Rocky Mountains, right? So it cuts off some regions. Some of the land in Wyoming and Montana that have some of those other really large national park systems, we don't grow crops in national parks. And so this is where the people in Montana and Wyoming find themselves at odds with things like the national park system, where they're like, we want to grow crops, we want to run cattle on this land, but it's federally protected land. You're taking away land that we could be getting income from by protecting it. Okay. All right. So when we talk about agricultural sustainability, then we're concerned about use for use. Okay. We're concerned about irrigation. Just to go back to our freshwater use, we're concerned about land use issues. We're very concerned about worker safety and compensation. We're concerned about who is actually farming. It takes a tremendous amount of practical knowledge and experience to farm well, to be able to withstand the mental rigors of not knowing what's going to happen to your crop that season and being able to plan for almost any eventuality that can happen on your property. More and more of us are opting that we don't want to have to deal with that, and that we want to be able to go to the grocery store and buy our food, and that's creating both an experience and a brain drain on who is actually using farming. And then we're also, what we're very familiar with, I would say, in terms of farming, others sometimes in these other issues, is chemical overuse, the application of fertilizers and pesticides, and the consequences that that has on not only the croplands and the food products that we get a chance to eat, but then on the ecosystems around us. Okay, is it really 12:15?
No, it's 10 after.
It's 10 after. Okay. Trying to sign off. Yes, I know. What I'm going to ask you to do is find yourself a partner. It can be one partner, or it can be 3 people in your group. And I want you to write your names on this worksheet. And I want you to answer the first question, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll be done for today. Do a second day of modern agriculture.